Just to note, this is being recorded. This is The Wisdom of the Wilderness, class number 1 of potentially, give or take, 12. So
Yep.
I'm going to say take it away, Professor Jake. We all know you and love you. So happy times over in Virginia.
Cursor again.
Oh, sorry about the cursor.
Who's cursing? What? Don't curse. Hey, good afternoon, Hearthstone. It's good to be with you all again. So this particular book, obviously I've done different books with y'all. This particular book, I thought would be good considering you're in the Pacific Northwest and many of you have an interest in nature. And it's the last book that Gerald May wrote actually before he died. And so we're going to read the preface and the introduction today and probably get into part 1, but I have it pretty much sketched out. So this will take 12 courses. The book is 190 pages long, plus the preface and the introduction. So that's just about 18 pages per class. I'll read it out loud, but I'll also stop in different sections so that we can have community discussion, which is a very big part of the classes that I hold. I want to hear your input, and also if you have specific questions or comments, personal experiences that match what we're reading, all that will add to the overall conviviality of our journey together. So without further ado, I'm going to open to the foreword, which hopefully you all have in your book. It's by Parker J. Palmer. And it's good just to have a little background information about the author. Jerry May knew he was dying as he wrote this book. So he gathered up all the life he could hold with words, as wild creatures gather food against a hard winter, and left us a book so well stocked with love and wisdom, tears and laughter, healing and hope, it can help all of us winter through. I met Jerry May in the early 1970s in Washington, D.C. when we worked together on several projects. We were young and unformed, but even then I knew I was in the presence of a good man, a brilliant mind, and a great soul. I was a community organizer, university professor, and spiritual neophyte. Jerry was launching out on 3 decades of that profoundly life-giving work with the Shalem Institute, an ecumenical organization and community devoted to reclaiming the Christian contemplative tradition enriched by insights from Eastern religions. Signing on with the Shalem Institute was a turning point for this gifted psychiatrist who had served as a medic in Vietnam, a medic who refused to wear a sidearm and later became a conscientious objector. At Shalem, Jerry deepened his birthright gift for contemplation and began to interweave that gift with his psychiatric training. He found a platform for counseling, speaking, and writing from which he supported the spiritual growth of countless grateful people through personal contact in 8 widely read, highly regarded books. At least 2 of his books, Will and Spirit and Addiction and Grace, have attained the status of contemporary classics. When I met Jerry, he was just beginning to blaze a pioneering trail in the emerging field of contemplative psychology, which is credible and influential today in part because of his work. Without the grounding of psychology, contemplative insight easily becomes untethered, floating above the realities of our embodied lives. Without the transcendence of contemplation, psychology quickly diminishes us, reducing the human mystery to banalities like impulse and impulse management. And just to give you an idea of the book that I'm working on here, a facet of it deals with contemplative psychology. Early on, Jerry May became convinced that a contemplative psychology could embrace, in the round, the great conundrum of the word become flesh that we call the human self. This, his last book, is rich with evidence that Jerry pursued this conviction until the day he died. In fact, I believe that the wisdom of wilderness opens new ground in the field Jerry helped to create precisely because of the end-of-life sensibilities he brought to writing it. In one splendid passage, Jerry writes about his deep woods encounter with a very large bear who came snuffling around his very thin tent in the middle of a very dark night. I lie unmoving for a very long time after the bear leaves, My senses completely alert, no thoughts, no images, seeing nothing, hearing only my heart and breath and the sounds of the night. For the first time in my life, I am experiencing pure fear. I am completely present in it, in a place beyond all coping because there is nothing to do. I have never before experienced such clean, unadulterated purity of emotion. This fear is naked. It consists in these slowly passing moments of my heart pounding, my breath rushing yet fully silent, my body ready for anything, my mind absolutely empty, open, waiting. I am fear. It is beautiful. For Jerry, contemplative psychology takes us beyond all coping to a place where we need not resist the difficult emotions of life, but can become one with them, which helps us become one with ourselves. Looking back on his early psychiatric practice, he criticized himself for spending too much time helping people cope with their difficulties. I have come to hate that word because to cope with something, you have to separate yourself from it. You make it your antagonist, your enemy. Like management, coping is a taming word, sometimes even a warfare word. Wild, untamed emotions are full of life spirit, vibrant with the energy of being. They don't have to be acted out, but neither do they need to be tamed. They are part of our inner wilderness. They can be just what they are. God save me from coping. God help me join, not separate. Help me be with and in, not apart from. Show me the way to savoring, not controlling. Dear God, hear my prayer. Make me forever copeless. So if any of you who are familiar with psychology are already seeing a real difference in the realm of contemplative psychology. Here in a single vibrant paragraph are a few of the gifts the reader will find in every chapter of this book. Clarity and candor about the author's own journey, psychological insights turned upside down and made more piercing as a result, a turning toward prayer that is more in your face than pious, and all of it rendered in clear and compelling prose. What great gifts Jerry May brought to his work. What great gifts he left behind for us to cherish. Intellectual power and spiritual courage were clearly two of Jerry's gifts. In the words of an ancient theologian, he knew how to think, quote, with the mind descended into the heart. But the impact of his work, the great and lasting legacy of hearts touched and lives transformed that Jerry left behind, would have been impossible. I think had it not been for a third gift, Jerry possessed a sense of humor rooted in divine madness. As his family and friends will testify, he always saw the cosmic comedy in the human condition, yours, mine, and his own. And that, we also call in the realm of pastoral care, the sacred clown. Jerry was fond of quoting lines and sometimes whole sections of sketches from Monty Python's Flying Circus, not the sort of source material acolytes expect their gurus to draw upon. Since guru was a role Jerry disdained for himself, Python served him well. In a meeting he and I attended where the talk had turned to demon possession, Jerry made the Python-esque proposal that the best way to exorcise demons was to become such a boring person that the evil spirits would seek a more interesting place to live, a thesis he laid out with an almost straight face. And a mutual friend recently told me about a conversation between Jerry and Thich Nhat Hanh, the much revered Vietnamese Buddhist master, in which Jerry said, Thich, old buddy, you know how you're always talking about this moment, precious moment, only moment? Well, Thich, some moments really suck. The Pythons would have been proud. In person, Jerry was a spontaneously funny man who proved Chesterton's famous remark, quote, the reason angels can fly is that they take themselves so lightly. His unforced humility and utter accessibility allowed people to trust him face to face and on the printed page with their inner lives. And in his speaking, counseling, and writing, Jerry was a teacher who proved William James's insight that common sense and a sense of humor are the same thing moving at different speeds. Using his lightning-fast common sense, Jerry tried to rescue psychiatry and spirituality from their occasional, to put it mildly, pretentiousness, making them too trustworthy and accessible to people in need. Jerry's divine madness was also, I believe, one source of the courage that allowed him to take on tough topics such as his groundbreaking work on addiction and this book on wilderness. Wilderness and its terrors is the text here, but courage is the subtext. Courage to face oneself in the wilderness and the wilderness in oneself. And anybody familiar with a lot of literature and the different world religions, the wilderness, especially the desert, is usually a place of tremendous spiritual testing that a prophet or a spiritual teacher goes to. Sometimes you eat the bear, and sometimes the bear eats you. How can you face the fearsome bear without seeing the joke? Dying as he brought the wisdom of wilderness to completion, Jerry drew on his divine madness as well as his fine mind and strong spirit. I am sick now, he writes in the preface. The prospect of my death is continually before me. My body is frail, my energy always at the edge of exhaustion. At the same time, I am wilder than I've ever been before. My soul basks in wilderness, and I am grateful. Imagine a sick, frail, exhausted, dying man who says he is wilder than ever before, which in Jerry's case is saying something. There is one more quality at the heart of this good man's life, perhaps the most important of all. Jerry was profoundly in love with his family, his wife Betty and their children Earl, Paul, Greg, Julie, and Chris. And when I asked Betty May, Jerry's lifelong love, co-conspirator and devoted gadfly, about Jerry's relation to his family, she said words I know to be true. Nothing, not his searching, not his books, not Shalem, nothing was more important to Jerry than his kids. They were his life and, I believe, his most important legacy. To me, these incredible human beings he left behind define him and explain him more than all his books put together. They reflect his wisdom, his goodness, his laughter, his stubbornness, his intelligence, his wonderings and wanderings, his passion and compassion, his love, everything that was wonderful about Jerry, and that still is Jerry today. Of course, that kind of love cannot be contained within a family. Blessedly, it spills over into a too often loveless world. Jerry's last words were spoken to his daughter, Julie, but they could have been spoken to any and all of us. Trust in love, trust in God. With Jerry May's death, we have suffered a great loss. With this book, forged in his living and refined in the crucible of his dying, we have received a great gift. I think Jerry would say that painful but promising paradoxes such as this are at the heart of the wilderness experience and of the wisdom traditions that have emerged from our encounters with wilderness, both inner and outer. I think Jerry would urge us to go beyond our simple-minded dualism about death and life, to see into and live into the wild unity of it all. I want to read that sentence again because I think it's extremely powerful and it does have a lot to do with the overall message of this book. I think Jerry would say that painful but promising paradoxes such as this are at the heart of the wilderness experience and of the wisdom traditions that have emerged from our encounters with wilderness, both inner and outer. I think Jerry would urge us to go beyond our simple-minded dualism about death and life, to see into and live into the wild unity of it all. Jerry opened his now classic Will and Spirit with these words: "We all have secrets in our hearts. I will tell you one of mine. All my life I have longed to say yes, to give myself completely to some ultimate someone or something." I believe that Jerry's longing has been fulfilled. Thanks to this gentle, wild, bright, and beautiful man, our stores of significant thought, authentic prayer, and shake the rafters laughter have been replenished on earth as they now are in heaven. Parker J. Palmer. I always like reading the forwards of books. I think they they shine an interesting light from another perspective on what the author is going to go into within the book. And the words wild and untamed are usually used for, animals, but Jerry may often use those for people to try to get us back into our true selves and away from the taming that societal conditioning puts on us every moment of our lives. So this is the preface that was written by Jerry Murray. I'm going to read that now before we go into starting the book. And this is a quote from St. John of the Cross. I'm getting a lot of feedback. All right. All who are free tell me 1,000 graceful things of you. All wound me more and leave me dying of, I don't know what. I am sick now. The prospect of my death is continually before me. My body is frail, my energy always at the edge of exhaustion. At the same time, I am wilder than I've ever been before. My soul basks in wilderness, and I am grateful. Wilderness is not just a place, it is also a state of being. If happiness means being happy and sadness means being sad, then wilderness means being wilder. Look it up, and you'll find that the primary meaning of wild is natural. In turn, natural comes from the Latin nasi, meaning to be born. Words like natal, nativity, and native come from the same root, all referring to birth. Wilderness, then, is not only the nature you find outdoors, it can also refer to your own true nature, the you that is closest to your birth. This inner wilderness is the untamed truth of who you really are. The stories that follow are accounts of how between 1990 and 1995, outdoor nature acquainted me with my own inner nature, how external wilderness spoke to my internal wilderness, and how it healed me and made me more whole. I was 50 years old in 1990. I had practiced psychiatry for nearly a quarter of a century and had practiced meditation for almost as long. With all that experience, it might seem odd that I still had so much to learn about my own nature, but I was not so unusual. In our modern, highly developed culture, nearly all of us are estranged from our true nature and consequently from the nature around us. From the time we are little children, we are taught to set ourselves apart from all natural inclinations so that we can control, modify, and restrain them. We have learned to be suspicious, even afraid, of any form of wildness. Some of us are unabashedly destructive of our environment. Others want to protect, manage, and be good stewards of our resources. Still others of us conjure up ideal images of nature, a pristine paradise when left untouched by human hands. What none of us seems to want, what we all resist, is to admit that we are inevitably, intimately, and irrevocably part of nature rather than apart from it. One of my favorite movie scenes is in John Huston's classic, The African Queen. Charlie Allnut, Humphrey Bogart, having had a bit too much to drink the night before, awakens to find Rose Sayer, Katharine Hepburn, pouring his bottles of gin into the Zambezi River. "What you being so mean for, miss?" he pleads. "A man takes a drop too much once in a while. It's only human nature." "Nature, Mr. Allnut," she replies, "is what we are put in this world to rise above." These words express the most fundamental estrangement of Western civilization, the belief that we must dominate and tame all that is wild within and around us. This conviction has wounded us deeply, forever making us feel apart from nature rather than a part of it. We separate what is natural from what is man-made. Dams built by beavers are natural, we say, but the dam we build are not. At worst, they are an abusive nature, at best, a management of natural resources. For the most part, our culture tries to manage inner and outer nature by force. We separate ourselves from wildness making an object at best, an adversary at worst, a thing to be conquered and subjugated. As a result, we have done much damage to the earth and to ourselves. But even when our attitudes shift from dominating to caring, even when we desire to heal some of the wounds we have inflicted upon the planet and upon ourselves, we still feel we must be separate and in control. We are always thinking in terms of management of natural resources, management of patient care in hospitals, management of our own feelings. Many cultures, especially those that we call primitive, experience no such estrangement. Instead, people of such cultures often reflect a sense of kinship, even union with the earth and its creatures, and a sense of harmony within themselves. I wonder if we might have been like that too long ago. If so, what happened to make us feel so separate? Was it our notion of a transcendent God above all creation who gave us the divine right of dominion over the earth? Or did deeper forces within us shape our insatiable need to improve upon things and our unquenchable thirst for control? I don't know the cause, but I do know that the fracture between us and nature is still unhealed. It is such an ancient thing that we have become accustomed to the pain of it. And I am convinced that before we can effectively act to heal the wounds we have inflicted upon the earth, we must somehow recover our own natural wholeness. There's another really wonderful author named Thomas Berry, who called himself a geologian, geologist and theologian. And his whole thing was that global warming was actually a result of our spiritual bankruptcy, rather than just simply a natural condition. I am further convinced that we cannot do this healing for ourselves. If we could, we would have done so long ago. Only the grace of something or someone beyond us can bring us the healing. In my case, the healing came through nature itself. For the most part, the stories I tell here are elaborations of my journal entries from those first 5 years of the 1990s, along with some current reflections and some memories from earlier times. I have arranged them according to themes so I may tell of something that happened recently and then go back to an account of an earlier time. I hope this will not be confusing. What happened in my wilderness experiences is for me more important than when it happened. I must also acknowledge that some of the accounts are likely to sound like tall tales. It's certainly possible that some of my perceptions were distorted, but I assure you that I have made nothing up. Aside from changing the names of certain places, the stories are as honest and accurate as I can make them. I am sharing my stories here in the hope that they will encourage, give heart to you in your own willingness to be taught and healed by nature's grace. I'm sure you already have some of your own stories of teaching and healing, and that there will be more to come. By definition, nature is wild and unpredictable, so your stories won't be the same as mine. My most profound experiences occurred when I was alone outdoors, away from civilization. But it might not be that way for you. You may find your wilderness anywhere, in your own house, your garden, with other people, in the most surprisingly ordinary situations. At this point in my own life, I no longer feel called to outdoor solitude. That particular yearning ended in 1995. Now it is the wilderness of my own fragmenting body that offers to heal me at a level far deeper than physical life. We all need to allow ourselves to be led into our own wilderness, there to be taught what we most need to know, and to be healed where we most need it. My stories speak often of a presence I encountered in the wilderness, or perhaps more accurately, one who sought me out and drew me there. I called this presence the power of the slowing. It was this power that seemed to beckon, guide, teach, heal, and show me very deeply who I am. All my life, I had longed for such a palpable and immediate encounter with a divine guiding presence, a feeling of unity with the world. This lifelong prayer was answered during those years in the outdoors. And as I now look back, this may have been nature's greatest gift to me. At that time, the power of the slowing always seemed to show up in surprising and dramatic ways. For me, it also had a distinctly feminine quality. I identified it with Mother Nature, an ancient female archetype that reaches back to such feminine concepts as holy wisdom in the book of Proverbs, Sophia in Greek philosophy, Hakma, Shekinah, and Gaia. I gave it, her, a name because to me, she was a living, breathing presence, as alive to me as any person I've ever met. As strange as it may sound, she talked to me and calmed my fears. Now, a decade later, I still feel this power and presence in my life more continually and more deeply than ever. But it is without gender now and far less dramatic. In truth, it feels quite ordinary. It simply is. Here again, your experience may be very different from mine. Just as you will find your wilderness in your own place, you will have your own experience of presence there. But my guess is that you will be touched and moved by something that is in you, but yet not completely you. Something dynamic, surprising, and very, very wise. I would also bet that if you are willing and if you listen very gently and carefully, you will sense that this mysterious wisdom is ready to lead you, guide you to where you need to be. It is your wilderness calling. So before we move on to part one, the call, would anybody like to share an experience that they had in nature that might be relatable to what he calls the power of the slowing, where kind of the world slowed down for you and something in nature, it doesn't have to be like, in the middle of the Sahara Desert, but any kind of nature kind of taught you a lesson?
And I have unmuted us. If those online want to speak, you'll want to unmute yourselves.
Nobody ever had a nice conversation with a cactus or a beetle?
Where I feel slowed down and more relaxed is with dogs. All the dogs in my life have always allowed me to realize they just live. They just live their lives, give love, receive love. And in petting them, and there's all sorts of medical reports about high blood pressure drops, but just being with a creature that just gives and receives love unconditionally has always been calming. And I tend to be a very type A personality, so having a dog around me has always been really important for me to slow down and appreciate life.
I think dogs, they love so unconditionally. One, because they're always getting scratched and massaged so that it eases their tension. That's a really good thing. And they can poop wherever they want. So, if you got those two things, you're doing pretty all right. So. I'll tell you a story about Michael Crichton, which from his book Travels. Michael Crichton he wrote movies, but originally he went to med school and he was going to become a doctor. Then he wrote Jurassic Park and The Andromeda Strain and a bunch of movies. But before, he was kind of really famous, he wrote this book Travels, and it tells of all these different kind of places that he went and the lessons he learned from them. Many of them were spiritual. And so he went to the spiritual retreat on the edge of the desert in California. And the first day he was there, but he was also kind of really just tense and anxious in his life. And the first day he was there, the person leading the retreat told everybody there to go out on the fringes of the desert landscape and to find something. It could be a rock, a tree, a bush, but just something, and develop a relationship with it, because they got breaks 3 times throughout the day. And those breaks would all be spent in communion with this natural whatever resource that they chose for the whole week. So he thought that was really stupid, you know, so he goes out there and he's thinking to himself, this is really stupid, you know. So eventually he finds this cactus that looks like it's kind of on the verge of dying, right? So he sits down by the cactus and he's like, this is stupid, you know, you're a stupid cactus, I'm stupid, this retreat is stupid, you know. And needless to say, not many people wanted to hang around with Michael Crichton at this retreat, right? Because he went back there, you know, and he's giving off this aura that everything is a waste of time, right? But then he goes back at the next break and he's like, you know, hello, stupid cactus, you know, like, how are you doing? You know, eventually by the evening, you know, he just kind of sits there. He doesn't call the cactus stupid. Well, anyway, over the course of the week, he keeps going back, keeps going back, keeps going back. Well, the seventh day, they have their, you know, they begin their last session. So the retreat leader says, you know, this is going to be your last break with whatever you chose before you come back here and we end the retreat and I send you off back into the world. And so he goes and sits by the cactus and he realizes that this cactus that had been looking really disheveled and on the verge of death is now like really vibrant and green and alive. And he sees like every aspect of its, you know, its thorns, and he just sees it in a whole new light. He finds it really beautiful. And you know, he starts crying actually, because he realizes now that he, you know, loves the cactus, you know, and he tells the cactus, you know, I love you, cactus. And, but what he's realizing, you know, is too, like when he went there, he really kind of disliked himself. He had been pulled into Hollywood. He had ended a relationship, you know, by being, you know, kind of a jackass. You know, and he had just made a lot of bad mistakes. And so what he was doing was he was allowing himself to see the mistakes that he made. First, he had been projecting it onto the cactus, all the stupid things that he did. But then he realized that the cactus was just being a cactus, and that he developed this relationship with it. And at the end of it, he really, you know, in the book, he says, you know, he realized he was really going to miss this cactus because it taught him a valuable lesson about himself. And so that would be a very good, and I always remember that example, because anytime somebody has a relationship with a cactus, I think that's memorable. I always remember that example because that's the power of the slowing, to really see something for what it is and not project onto it, you know, our own feelings, our own whatever, because a cactus is what it is, regardless of what we project onto it. But then also we can learn very deeply about something, like the person was talking about the dog, that doesn't have so much, you know, intellectual, or what the Buddhists call monkey mind, you know, where we're always bouncing around in our mind. So that idea of the power of the slowing, I always find that Michael Crichton section about the cactus to really kind of emulate what Gerald May is talking about in this book. So I know that the Hearthstone has a bunch of plants around. So, you know, all of you just kind of go talk to them and see what's going on with them and report back to me next week. All right, so chapter 1 is called The Call. And there's another quote, there's a quote from St. John of the Cross, I believe at the beginning of every section. And it says, to the mountain and to the hill, to where the pure water flows, and further, deep into the thicket. First trip to the mountain. Summer, 1990. I'm on my way. The miles are going quickly now that I'm on the interstate with the metropolitan traffic behind me. I'm driving through hilly green countryside, feeling very much alive. I notice my mind shifting from thoughts about things left undone to excitement and wonder about what I'm getting into. I relax a little. My hands loosen on the steering wheel, and I'm aware now of how tight my shoulder muscles have been. How long has this tension been in me? Certainly for months, perhaps even years. I smell the canvas of my old, long unused pup tent in the back of the car. It's hot and I've been driving with the windows up and the air conditioning on. Ease it, I think. I don't know what that means, but it has something to do with the ancient tension in my shoulders, a tightness I'm so used to, I don't usually feel it. I turn off the air conditioning and roll the windows, and the warm airstream hits my face and blows my hair, and I roll my neck a little. Something relaxing is happening, and I love it. Every bit of the feeling of it inside me. I feel love, almost romantic love for the smell of the old pup tent, love for the air messing up my hair, love for being here on this interstate. And then I see the mountains. The Allegheny foothills always surprise me. I've traveled this interstate many times coming up out of the Piedmont Plateau, and it's always the same. I'm driving along and the hills are not there. Then suddenly, even when I know where to expect them, they appear as if they had just decided to show up. A surprise of beauty. As I see them now, though, I sense more than their beauty. It's a deep homecoming, welcoming feeling. I could swear the mountains are reaching out for me, as if they have palpable arms opening, guiding, ready to take me in. Everything in me relaxes at this. I want to be taken in. I am overcome with love right here on the interstate, passing a tractor trailer, its diesel roaring into the wind in a great rushing whine. I'm not anywhere near the state forest yet, but I've said yes to a call, and I've been taken. I'm in love. The call of wilderness is very familiar to me. In one way or another, it is probably always calling. Sometimes I have felt it inwardly as an old familiar longing, a passion unfulfilled, what Thoreau called a yearning for the wild that no language could ever express. At its most powerful, however, the call seemed to have come from outside me, from some wild place and presence, a true call of the wild. The image that comes to me is of a mountain forest opening invisible arms to me, inviting me to enter into its secret places so deeply and completely that I finally disappeared. And there, in soft, rich lostness, I will be healed. My own true nature will be restored. It is a familiar feeling. Although I do not recall the beginnings of this feeling, I know it is very old. Its roots go far back in my life, their fibers touching my earliest memories. Sunlight on my crib, the sacred sound and touch of raindrops, the smells of dusty fields and musty forests where I was carried by my parents, and the tender brushing of breezes upon my skin. A full memory comes. I am very young, no more than 4 years old. My father has taken me hunting with him. It is not the first time I have come with him, and I am proud that he brings me along. My little legs are keeping up with his strides, my small hand in his, and I feel the soft, happy crunch of our walking across the hayfield in late autumn, the afternoon sun just at the top of the tree line, his wool shirt rough, like his hand and his whiskery cheeks, and there is no trace of fear in my body. I walk on his right side, as always, while in the crook of his left arm, he carries his 12-gauge double-barreled Ithaca featherweight shotgun, its breech open, so the gun bends to fit the curve of his elbow like a part of him. Our little Springer Spaniel, dear God, I wish I could remember his name, nuzzles into a brush pile up ahead and suddenly stops still. My father releases my hand, and I too become still, like the dog is still, like the air, like the whole world. My father whispers, softer than breath, lips with a slight grin and barely moving, dog never points. In the stillness, I hear the click of the breech closing. It is a soft sound, and I love it because it is gentle, and I know another sound will be coming soon, an explosion so huge and harsh that it will overwhelm me no matter how completely I expect it to. Yet there is no fear anywhere, no tension, only stillness inside and out. My father steps forward once, twice, casually, not prowling, just loose, easy. I stay still. I know it is my job to remain motionless, though I do not recall my father ever teaching me so. The dog sees my father moving and moves forward also, and suddenly a giant part of the brush flops and flaps upward, screaming for the air, trying to get there, and the sound of the shotgun nearly knocks me over. And in the after ringing with my hands too late over my ears, I hear, "Nice bird. You got you a nice pheasant, Jerry." He has turned and is smiling big at me, and for some reason so cloudy to me now, I feel very proud of myself. I smile big back. My father is already walking toward the brush pile where I know something is lying, and I hope it is lying very still and really dead. "Fetch," he calls to the dog. Turning back to me, he laughs. "Dog won't fetch. Look at him." Indeed, the dog is standing still, unable or unwilling to search out the bird. Like the dog, I don't want to go where the bird lies. This is my first fear, the beginning of tenseness in my body. I don't want the bird to be not dead. I know my father does not like it when a bird is wounded. I know I do not like it. I don't even want to watch the dog for fear he will again flush the wounded bird and it will struggle up once more, splattering blood with no hope for the sky. But I do watch carefully, for if it happens, I must see it. Is this my first courage or the beginning of morbid allure? All I know is that fear and the dissipation of it made me part of the natural world, made me feel alive. My father moves into the high grass, laughing because now the dog decides to come in from the side. "Yeah, now you'll get it, won't you?" my father chuckles. I smile a little, still conscious of the unseen bird, perhaps not dead. My father laughs again. "Well, go ahead, get it, fetch." That is where the dog stops again and blinks dumbly at my father, who now doubles over with laughter. Then the dog sits as if waiting for my father to collect himself. And this strikes my father as so hilarious that he lays the shotgun in the grass and lays himself in the grass and holds his stomach and laughs himself into tears with his legs in the air, wonderful, huge laughs echoing off the tree line, healing the field and the sky in all my fear. I run giggling to him and leap onto his stomach, and he doesn't see me coming, and I knock his breath away. He grabs me and we're rolling in the grass, and the dog leaps in, and there's nothing in the universe but laughter and tumbling and hay straws down my back. And we lie holding our stomachs, recovering under the merciful sky as the tree shadows reach us and a breeze begins. "Well, Jerry," says my father, "let's get your bird." I don't remember whether this bird was alive or dead. I like to think it was completely dead, a clean shot. I do remember walking home, my father carrying the pheasant until we got near the house because it was too heavy for me, and giving it to me, and I was so proud in the early dark to show my mother what we had brought for dinner. I remember the sleekness and rich colors of the feathers, and later the hard, deep taste of the meat, and the need to watch out for shot buried in the flesh that could break a tooth if you bit down too hard. I was very small. I'm going to stop there for a second. It's amazingly beautiful written passage. That really brings the reader into that moment that he felt his first sense of connection to nature, sense of fear, sense of allure. Does anybody have an early memory from childhood, maybe with a parent or a grandparent, of having a very kind of visceral connection with nature, one of your first connections with nature in your life?
That was so long ago.
Or, just anything from an early time in your life where kind of the natural world was opened up to you and you saw it differently than you had before. I think we got somebody.
I have something to say. Yeah, my family goes hiking, backpacking in the Sierra Mountains. And my father was one of the Boy Scout leaders, and we were taking a bunch of boys, and I was not a boy, of course, but I was responsible to keep the boys in line on this 5-mile hiking trip, getting prepared for hiking in the Sierra Mountains. And I just had my last ear operation surgery, and I really never heard sounds clearly, but as walking on a trail.
How do you exit this and add it?
Keep going.
And the boys were in front of me, but I remember hearing the wind going through the trees, and it was just a beautiful sound, and I was getting further and further behind the boys. The boys were coming, your dad is looking for you, come on, keep up. And then I heard the birds were chirping in the air, and they're flying, and just chirping and singing. It's so beautiful. And I feel like we're really connected to nature. And I mean, I didn't realize nature's so beautiful. I was born deaf. I had a lot of operations. So the last one was a miracle for me. And then I went to the meadow, and there was a buzzing sound around me. And I couldn't figure it out. I looked around with the buzzing sound. There was a little bumblebee buzzing around in the meadow. But I was amongst little wildflowers in the meadow. And then I walked toward the edge of the cliff, and down below was the ocean. We were crashing against the seawall. And looking down, like, whoa! I mean, they're so beautiful. And the boys, come on, Dad, you want be with us? Come on, come on. So, I mean, it's just, I'm really connected with nature. It's so beautiful. It's just, I didn't feel alone. Like nature was talking to me for the first time. Yeah, it's just beautiful. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. That's very beautiful. Like to have that experience, and the way you described it was very beautiful. Thank you.
I was lucky enough to go to the Olympic Peninsula with my grandfather, who was a logger in his earlier life. And he would take us out to La Push, which was on a reservation. And he was friends with the tribal leader there. And we would go out and go climbing together. And I was young, I was probably 4 or 5, first time we did that. And just hearing the waves and seeing the power of the waves, and then being taught to look very closely at the sand and pay attention to where the little holes are. And that's where you're gonna find the food. And then having the tribal leader help us, you know, do the clamming and then forage in the forest for other things to eat with our clams. And we build a fire on the beach and eat right there. And I just remember that the smell of the salt water and the taste of the salt water in the clams and the huckleberries, the red huckleberries that were tart, and just being there on the sand with my grandpa and paying attention to the little details. And I did that the rest of my life. Just I learned to look for the small in the large. And I think that helped me in my career. I was a nurse for 24 years, and I was always told, you see things before they happen. And I think because I learned very young, look for the detail and enjoy what you're seeing and pay attention to how it's changing and what's happening. Because you could see that. You could see as you start digging that the spout would move, and you'd have to move with it. And it was just that powerful that moment, and going to the ocean still, that smell brings back being there with my grandpa, and paying attention to what's going on around me rather than think about what I have to do tomorrow.
It's very beautiful that the phrase "looking for the small within the large," and I could see how that would definitely correspond to the intuitive realm of being a nurse, which not every nurse goes into, and sometimes, but how you brought that into your career, would be very valuable to the patients that you were working with. So, we have about 5 minutes left. So I'm just going to read a few paragraphs from the next part called Never Alone, and then we'll continue there next week. Like most sons, I'm sure I idolized my father in many ways, but he really was an expert outdoorsman. He was a professional. He built camps for churches and the YMCA. And during the Depression, he made a living leading fishing trips to Isle Royale and on up into Canada. I remember stories he told of the businessmen he had guided into the North Woods, men who still had enough money to make such a trip, men who were longing to escape the stress of hard times, men who had become so stony hard themselves, they were ready to crack like the thin, cold, skipping rocks you find along winter lake shores that break when you try to pick them out of the frozen sand. Softening up was what my father said happened to the men on those trips. Just being out there, everyone would become increasingly silly and wild and natural. My father would grin as he described how deeply the men loved being softened up and how they didn't even know what was happening to them. I remember my father hunting, fishing, camping, walking through woods among birches and sweet pines, rowing his wooden boat out into small Michigan lakes where gentle waves collected foam and made luffing sounds on the shore where I stood in the morning, watching. I don't remember his ever teaching me about the outdoors. I don't recall his saying a single word about how to build a fire or pitch a tent. But just by watching him, I learned something very important, his way of being there. His way of being outdoors was very different from that of my mother. She came from a family of farmers who saw all of nature, including human nature, as an adversary, something to be tamed. In contrast, my father's family were teachers, preachers, and shopkeepers. And the wonderful thing about their attitude toward nature was that they didn't have one. They just spent time there. They made no comments about it. As I look back now from my own unchosen physical vulnerability, I am touched by how vulnerable my father was in the outdoors, how very unprotected. Time after time, he would come home hurt in some way, scratched by thorns or covered with poison oak or mosquito bites or shivering blue from cold or green from seasickness because the wind had come up on the lake. My mother always huffed about what he should have done to avoid such dangers, but he never took her advice. He went his own way, following his own call. And we'll end it there for today with following your own call. Any comments about this? So we read the prologue, the introduction, and a little bit of part one. Any comments so far on the wisdom of wilderness? All right. Well, remember, talk to a plant, pet each other, scratch each other like dogs, and you'll be much stress-free.
What about all the fake plants we have here?
Fake plants are like, Domino's pizza. It's never going to be the real thing.
All right. Have a great week, Jake. We'll see you next time.
All right. Peace.